Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Today, we're going way back this time to the Tang Dynasty. We're going to explore the lives of prostitutes.
Ooh, fascinating.
And you might be thinking, oh, okay, this is, pretty straightforward. But I guarantee you it's far more complex than you might think.
Yeah, I think what's so interesting about the Tang Dynasty is it really reveals a society where the lines between like art, talent, and sex work, they were all really blurred together. Really challenges a lot of our modern assumptions.
Yeah. And to help us kind of unpack all of this, we're going to try to pronounce it right.
Yeah.
But it's basically our guide into this world. And what we want to try to do is peel back all of these kind of modern assumptions and really try to understand these women as individuals navigating this very specific world.
Yeah, I think a great place to start might be with that really common misconception that the terms boor and bull very neatly separated, prostitutes who sold sex versus those who sold their artistic skills.
So kind of a body versus art distinction.
Right.
Did they actually view it that way back then?
Well, that's what's so interesting. When you look at our source, it actually shows that these terms were used pretty much interchangeably in a lot of these Tang Dynasty texts.
Oh, wow.
And even more interestingly, sometimes the character for just skill appears, which suggests that talent was at least initially, central to the profession.
So it almost seems like our very idea that you can separate sex worker from artist, it almost says more of us today and how we view things than it does about how it actually was back then.
Right.
It makes you think.
It really does. It begs the question of why is our modern understanding so rigid?
Yeah.
And what does that say about us and how we view this topic even today? But before we jump too far ahead into like modern day stuff, let's get back to the Tang Dynasty itself.
Okay.
Basically categorizes prostitutes into three main types: official, private family, and independent. And each one had a very different experience.
Okay, so let's start with official prostitutes. What did that entail?
So these women were essentially state slaves,
Really?
designated as such through this special household registration called yueji.
Okay.
So their lives, their work, even who they served, it was all controlled by the government.
Wow.
And so imagine being one of the most elite, right? You're serving the emperor himself in the Fang, which was this special institution dedicated to music, dance, the arts.
Wow. So the emperor had his own group of say talented companions.
Right.
I can only imagine the level of skill required to even get to that position.
Absolutely. But even their lives were at the mercy of political and economic forces. So, for example, after the Lushan Rebellion, the imperial court, they're reeling. They're not able to fully support these women.
So what happened to them? Were they just dismissed?
Well, not quite. It seems like they probably downsized the Na, and perhaps even more interestingly, it seems like they allowed or at least turned a blind eye to these women finding, other ways to make ends meet, what we might call, engaging in private prostitution.
Okay. So it was considered acceptable for officials to be spending time with these women, even though they were technically state property.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of fascinating when you compare it to the, later dynasties.
Right. The Tang Dynasty was known for its relatively, relaxed social norms, shall we say. In fact, you contrast that with Song Dynasty, where fraternizing with official prostitutes could actually get an official fired.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
Right.
What caused that shift in thinking?
Well, the Song Dynasty, you had this growing influence of Confucian morality, which really emphasized stricter social hierarchies, a very clear separation between the elite and commoners. And so that likely played a role in their stricter attitudes.
So it sounds like they look back on the Tang era with a little bit of judgment. Maybe even a little bit like, oh, if that happened today, heads would roll.
Oh, absolutely. They thought the Tang officials were too lax, the rules were too lenient.
So we've got these elite women serving the emperor, and then other official prostitutes, presumably at the, local level, catering to everybody else. It must have been a really complex system.
It was. And don't forget, there were also the military prostitutes, the ones who were specifically serving soldiers.
Right.
They were also a type of official prostitute. But let's shift gears a little bit now and look at that second category, the private family prostitutes. Their stories, they're full of intrigue and sadly, quite a bit of tragedy as well.
Yeah, I'm all ears.
Yeah.
What made their experiences so different? So private family prostitutes, it sounds like they were kind of in a tough spot. What can you tell us about their lives?
Well, these women were essentially owned by wealthy families. And sadly, they had very, very little agency. Kind of think of them almost as pawns in this patriarchal game, often used as gifts between powerful men, to strengthen alliances or gain favor.
So essentially, they were viewed as valuable objects to be traded rather than human beings. I mean, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's a harsh reality, but that was kind of the norm back then. I mean, for example, Liu Yuxi,
Okay.
he was gifted this beautiful singing girl by a former military governor named Li. And you know what? The story actually gave rise to the idiom "yu," which means to become accustomed to something.
That's fascinating. I've never actually thought about where that idiom came from. So how does a gift of a singing girl lead to that idiom?
Well, so Liu Yuxi at the time, he was kind of struggling financially, and it's pretty clear he was smitten with this talented woman. He even wrote a poem about her where he kind of contrasts his own captivation with the nonchalant attitude of the wealthy governor who was so used to being, surrounded by beauty.
Right.
And get this, the governor, being the generous man he was, he just gives the girl to Liu Yuxi.
I mean, it's just jarring to think of a human being being given away like that. Even if we kind of factor in the different social norms of the time, it really highlights that power imbalance in that society.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And speaking of poets and their relationships with singing girls, we can't overlook Bai Jui. He also kept many singing girls in his household, and his writings about them, they can make a modern reader, a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, I read some of his poetry. He seemed to have a rather I don't know, possessive attitude towards the women, wouldn't you say?
I think that's a fair assessment. He often wrote about their physical attributes in a way that, really kind of objectified them.
Hmm.
In one poem, he even boasts about how he replaces his singing girls every few years because they, aged beyond his preference. He definitely, wouldn't be considered a champion for women's rights today.
Right. Yeah. It almost sounds like he valued their youth and beauty over their actual talent, which is kind of a stark contrast to, that initial um, emphasis on skill that we were talking about earlier.
Right, right. It does seem that way. However, there's this story about Bai Jui that I think we need to address because you might have heard the tale of him driving a singing girl named Guan Pan Pan to suicide with this really cruel poem.
Okay.
And this was a popular story in the Song Dynasty, even adapted into a play.
Wow.
It's completely fabricated.
Really? So this famous tragic romance is actually a work of fiction.
Yes, it's entirely made up. While there was a real Guan Pompen, she wasn't connected to the official that the story names and Bai Jui's poems about her. They actually kind of express sympathy and admiration for her choice to remain faithful to her deceased lover. It's not judgment or scorn at all.
Wow. It's amazing how a historical myth like that can take hold and become so pervasive.
Hmm.
It seems like the Song Dynasty was maybe more, I don't know, inclined towards moralizing and maybe even, embellishing stories for dramatic effect.
Possibly, yeah. Possible that they were kind of projecting their own stricter social norms onto the Tang Dynasty, kind of shaping the narrative to fit their worldview. It's a good reminder that history is often told through the lens of the storyteller.
That's an excellent point. So to sum it up, it sounds like the life of a private family prostitute wasn't exactly a desirable one. I mean, they were essentially pawns, very little control over their own destiny.
Yeah, that's unfortunately an accurate assessment.
Yeah.
But let's move on now to our third category, the independent prostitutes, and their experiences may resonate a little more closely with kind of our modern understanding of sex workers.
Independent prostitutes. Okay, that sounds like a pretty
Yeah.
big shift from
Yeah.
the other two categories. So
Mm.
so these women, they chose this profession. They weren't controlled by the state or a wealthy family.
Exactly. They
Okay.
operated independently. And what's fascinating is they weren't even officially recognized as prostitutes under the law.
Really?
Yeah, it was kind of a gray area. They were outcasts, but not legally designated as such.
I'm curious about how prevalent they were in the Tang Dynasty. Did they face significant social stigma?
Well, it seems like they weren't quite as prominent during this this period. They became much more dominant in later dynasties. But we do have this really kind of poignant story that sheds some light on their experiences. It's about a woman named Fu Niyang who worked in the Bailey district of Chang'an. That was the largest red light district in the city.
So kind of, I'm picturing that Bailey district as kind of like, ancient China's equivalent to like Amsterdam's red light district,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So what can you tell us about Fu Niyang's story?
Well, so she was close with this man named Sun Qi, who was the author of a text actually about the Bailey district, and she wanted to leave prostitution. She actually asked him to buy her freedom.
So it sounds like she was actively seeking a way out. Did Sun Qi help her?
Unfortunately not. He essentially rejected her. He claimed that even though she wasn't, a registered prostitute, she had already crossed a line, and he couldn't bring her into his respectable world.
I mean, that's terrible. What a cruel thing to do. I guess it's just another stark reminder of those social barriers that these women faced, even if they weren't legally bound to the profession.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a heartbreaking story, but it also, reveals that for independent prostitutes, leaving the profession was at least a possibility, which is, unlike the official prostitutes who were trapped by their, that foot status that we talked about.
Right. We see that in stories like the story of Li Hua, where Li Hua was able to buy her freedom because she wasn't an official prostitute.
Exactly. Yeah.
So now this raises a fascinating question. If independent prostitutes were less common in the Tang Dynasty, why did they become so prevalent in later periods?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one that historians are still exploring. But our source seems to hint that it's connected to just these broader social and economic forces at play. Think about all the major changes that occurred in Chinese society after the Tang Dynasty. What kind of shifts might have led to the rise of independent sex workers? Were similar trends happening in other parts of the world? These are all questions worth pondering.
That's what I love about these deep dives. We start with this very specific topic, like the lives of Tang Dynasty prostitutes, but we always uncover these connections to these much bigger questions about history and society and even our own lives today.
It's all about connecting those dots, right?
Mm.
Recognizing those patterns and understanding how these seemingly unrelated pieces fit into this larger puzzle of the human experience.
Exactly. So we've learned that Tang Dynasty prostitutes, they weren't a monolithic group. Their lives and experiences were shaped by their legal status, their relationships with men, and even just these broader social and economic forces.
Right. And their stories, I think they challenge us to look beyond these simplistic labels and acknowledge just the complexity of their lives. They were artists, they were entertainers, they were slaves, they were businesswomen, and they were individuals just striving for agency in a system that often denied them that basic right.
Yeah, and it's incredible how much the role of prostitutes changed even just within Chinese society.
Yeah.
And that evolution it continues today, and it kind of poses all these questions about how we define work, relationships, women's agency. I mean, what do you think has kind of fueled these changes?
Well, it's a constantly shifting landscape, right? It's shaped by everything from economic conditions to technological advancements, evolving social norms, and the Tang Dynasty with its unique mix of official, private, and independent prostitutes. I think it offers this really fascinating glimpse into how these forces played out in a specific time and place.
Right, and it really makes you think about how these issues are still so relevant today.
Yeah.
Earlier we were talking about how those lines between artist and sex worker were so blurry in the Tang Dynasty. I mean, do you think those lines are any clearer today, or are we still grappling with similar questions about women's roles, the commodification of bodies, the very nature of work?
These are all really important questions to think about, and
Right.
I don't have easy answers, but I think it's something to consider as you kind of move through the world, encountering different perspectives and challenging your own assumptions. I mean, that's really what these deep dives are all about, right?
Right.
Exploring these nuances of history and connecting them to the present.
Yeah. Well said. I hope you enjoyed this journey into the lives of Tang Dynasty prostitutes. Their stories are a reminder that history is never simple, and that understanding the past can help us better navigate, all the complexities of the present.
Absolutely. By delving into these seemingly distant worlds, I think we gain new perspectives on our own lives and the forces that shape our society.
Well, until next time, everyone, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. All right, so you know that iconic image, the one of Meng Jiangnu weeping at the Great Wall? Super powerful, right? But have you ever wondered how that story came to be? With all the fantastical elements and everything?
It's really wild how this story, I mean, it's like so deeply rooted in Chinese culture, but it actually started out totally different.
Yeah, no kidding. So no collapsing walls or anything supernatural going on in the earliest version?
Nope, not quite. We got to go all the way back to the 5th century BC to a text called the Zhuozhuan.
Okay, so what is that exactly? Like, what kind of text?
It's basically this ancient chronicle, like a historical record, lots of events and speeches recorded in there. And it's in this text that we find a story that, get this, shares some roots with the Meng Jiangnu legend.
Okay, so spill the tea. What's the story?
Well, this early version, it centers around the wife of a soldier, a guy named Xi Liang. He unfortunately dies in battle. And get this, the story never actually mentions Meng Jiangnu, not even a collapsing wall for that matter.
Whoa, so it's like a totally different vibe then.
Right, it's more about the wife's unwavering commitment to social customs and her courage and demanding respect for her husband's sacrifice.
So she's not just sitting around grieving, she's taking action.
Exactly. Like when the ruler tries to offer his condolences, but outside the city limit, she flat out refuses.
No way.
Totally. She insists that he has to come to her home, as tradition dictated. It was a major statement about her character and her deep understanding of etiquette.
Dang, that's bold. She's already a force to be reckoned with, even in this early version.
Oh, absolutely. And while it's, not exactly the same as the fantastical stuff we see in the later versions of the Meng Jiangnu story, you can already see some of those core themes starting to pop up.
Yeah, like what?
Well, the devoted wife, the tragic loss, and this quest for justice. They're all there.
So those are the seeds. But how did this story start to sprout into the legend we all know? What are the big turning points?
Well, later texts start to add more layers to the story. For instance, the Liji Tanggong, it really emphasizes the intensity of Qi Liang's wife's mourning.
So it was over the top.
Yeah, it wasn't just proper, it was powerful and attention-grabbing. Imagine a public display of grief so profound that it becomes a spectacle.
Oh wow, I get it. Her grief starts to become larger than life.
Exactly. And then in Mencius, her lamentations are described as so moving that they actually influence the music of the entire state. Her grief becomes intertwined with the cultural fabric of the time.
No way, that's crazy. So it's not just personal anymore, it's impacting society as a whole.
But still,
No collapsing walls, right?
not yet.
Yeah.
Gotta jump ahead to the writings of Lu Xiang, who lived during the Western Han Dynasty. This is where things get really interesting. His version adds this detail of the wife, she's crying so hard over her husband's body, which, by the way, she's placed by a city wall, that the wall collapses.
Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Collapsing wall, dramatic grief, it's all coming together. But wait, there's one crucial element still missing, right?
You got it. No Great Wall yet.
Right.
This version actually comes before the construction of the Great Wall by Qin Shi Huang by 300 years. So the wall she cries over in Lu Xiang's version, it's probably just a regular city wall.
Ah, okay, that makes sense. So how does the story make that leap from a regular city wall to the Great Wall? That's where the real legend starts to take shape, right?
You got it. And that's exactly where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive. So yeah, the Great Wall showing up in the story, that's a huge shift, right? It's it takes this personal tragedy and turns it into, well, a commentary on something way bigger, the whole power of the state and how much suffering it can cause.
Totally. It's this is where the legend starts to hit on those themes we associate with Meng Jiangnu today, right? But how does that happen? Who makes that connection between this grieving wife and the Great Wall?
Well, we can trace that shift back to this Tang Dynasty poem called Qi Liang's Wife. It was written by a Buddhist monk, Wanzhu.
Buddhist monk, huh? Interesting. So what's the deal with this poem?
Well, this is where we first meet Qin Shi Huang, the emperor who is known for, well, his ambition and for all those workers who died building the Great Wall.
Oh yeah, no kidding. Suddenly we're talking about some serious historical weight here. Qin Shi Huang, the Great Wall. I mean, everyone knows those names, those symbols.
Right. And Guanxu, he doesn't shy away from the darker side of the story either. His poem, it kind of hints that forced labor was used to build the wall, tapping into that whole idea of resentment and suffering, especially for the people.
Makes sense. The Great Wall, impressive, sure, but definitely built on, well, a lot of hardship.
Exactly. And Xi Liang, the soldier from the original story, he becomes a victim of this whole brutal project, a tragic figure who represents all those lives lost under Qin Shi Huang.
So it's not just about a wife missing her husband anymore. It's about the human cost of this massive project, right? All the suffering caused by this, well, imperial ambition.
Exactly. And this connection that Guanxu is making, it wasn't just out of thin air. It reflects this growing sentiment of the time, this idea that the Great Wall, for all its grandeur, was also a symbol of tyranny and oppression.
Yeah, that makes sense. It reminds me of those two Han Dynasty poems, Yinma Cheng Cheng Kuxing, right? They're so full of emotion, talking about families being torn apart and all the lives lost because of the wall's construction. Super heartbreaking stuff.
Oh, for sure. But those poems are like powerful examples of how the Great Wall was already linked to suffering and injustice, you know? They're the perfect context for Qi Liang's wife's story to merge with the Great Wall legend. It's like her grief becomes a symbol for the whole nation's grief, and her search for justice reflects that desire to hold power accountable.
It's crazy how a story that seems so simple can become so powerful. It's like it becomes a way for people to deal with these big, complex emotions and anxieties.
Absolutely. It's like this merging of personal tragedy with, well, the weight of history. It sets the stage for the legendary Meng Jiangnu to emerge. But the transition wasn't like this sudden thing, you know, it was gradual, shaped by how oral storytelling works.
Right. I mean, think about it. Names, details, they all change over time in these oral traditions. It's like a game of telephone, right? Like how Qi Liang's name went through a few changes.
Oh, yeah, totally. Over time, it morphed into Fan Ziliang and then Wan Ziliang. It's likely because of, regional differences in how people pronounce things and how oral stories tend to simplify names over time. It's natural.
Yeah, it's like all these little changes show how language evolves and how stories adapt to different places and dialects. Fascinating. So how does our heroine finally get her name? Meng Jiangnu. What does that happen?
Well, Mengjiang was actually a common term for beautiful women in ancient texts, especially those from the state of Qi, where Qi Liang was from. So it was a natural fit for the nameless wife, especially in the realm of popular culture, where a catchy name makes a story more, well, memorable and appealing.
Oh, so it's like branding. A good name helps a story stick in people's minds and spread more easily.
Right, and it seems like later storytellers weren't totally familiar with naming conventions from, like, way back then. They thought Meng was a surname and even made up a story about her being the daughter of this rich guy named Meng.
So basically they get a little creative, shaping the story to fit their own understanding. It's less about historical accuracy and more about what connects with people, right?
Exactly, and this highlights something really key about the Meng Jiangnu legend. It's this balance between these fixed elements, like a core set of things that always stay the same, and then this flexibility to adapt and be reinterpreted in different contexts.
So there's this like framework, a skeleton, but within that framework, there's room for creativity and adaptation, like jazz.
Precisely. Scholars have identified 9 stable elements that show up in pretty much every version of the Meng Jiangnu story, things that don't change.
Ooh, okay, let me guess a few. So we have Qin Shi Huang wanting to build a great wall, the husband trying to run away from being forced to work on it, right? And then he dies and gets like built into the wall itself.
You got it. It's like those are the things you always find, but the stuff in between. That's where the storytellers get to play around?
Yeah, okay, I like that. So like what kind of stuff are we talking about here? How do those other details change the story?
Okay, so think about the very beginning, like why Qin Shi Huang even decides to build the Great Wall. In some versions, it's like super straightforward. He wants to protect his empire, so boom, Great Wall. But then there are other versions, and well, things get a little more interesting.
Interesting. How, like, do they make him out to be a straight up bad guy?
Sometimes, yeah. But other times, it gets, well, kind of weird. There's this one version from Taiwan, and get this, they say he built the Great Wall because he wanted to marry his own mother.
Hold up. What? Marry his mom? That's a new one.
It's definitely out there. But you got to remember, these stories, they're not always about getting the history exactly right. They reflect what people were worried about, what they believed.
So see, even the really strange stuff can tell us about the people who were telling the story.
Exactly. Like in this case, maybe this whole idea of Qin Shi Huang wanting to marry his mom, it could be about those really strong taboos against incest, or about how messed up things get when someone has too much power.
Oh, wow. So it's not just a random, shocking detail. It's like adding another layer of meaning to the story.
Right, and you see that kind of thing happening all throughout the legend. Like, think about Meng Jiangnu's journey to find her husband. Sometimes it's all about how determined and strong she is. She overcomes obstacles, outsmarts people who get in her way. It's like those versions celebrate her as this amazing, independent woman.
So it's kind of like a feminist take on the story.
Yeah, you could definitely see it that way. But then you have other versions where it's all about the supernatural stuff, like she gets help from spirits or finds magical objects or even like the gods step in to help her out.
So it's like those versions are tapping into different beliefs, right? Like fate, the spirit world, all that.
Exactly. And those variations, they're not just there to make the story more exciting. They actually shape how people understand the main message.
So the storyteller can emphasize different things depending on what details they choose to include.
Yep. By changing those details, they can focus on things like how important it is for people to stick together, or how powerful it can be when one person takes action, or even how supernatural forces can bring justice against bad leaders.
Man, it's wild how this one story, the Meng Jiaonu legend, can have so many different meanings.
That's what's so cool about folktales. They evolve, they change, they like speak to people on so many levels. It's like they capture something about being human that goes beyond any specific time or place.
It makes you think about all the stories we hear, not just these old legends. Do we always realize how they're changing how we see the world, how we see ourselves? Are we missing something deeper?
That's such a great question. And honestly, I think that's one of the most important things we've talked about today. Stories are powerful, and they're not just like frozen in time. They're alive. They change with every retelling. And when we understand, when we look beneath the surface, we start to appreciate how complex they are and how they connect with us on so many different levels.
So the next time we hear a story, whether it's something from when we were kids or even like the news, we should remember Meng Jiangnu, right? Like, what are the core parts, the truths that don't change? And then what are those little details that might be hinting at something bigger, something about the culture, what the storyteller wants us to think, even our own biases?
Exactly. And when we see how powerful stories are and how they subtly shape our understanding, we become like more active participants in this ongoing conversation, this conversation between the past, the present, and the future. And who knows what amazing things we'll discover along the way.
I like that. Thanks for taking this deep dive with me. We're going to be tackling the 4 beauties of ancient China,
Ooh,
a topic that one of you lovely listeners specifically requested.
excellent.
Yeah, you were curious about where this whole concept of the 4 beauties even came from.
Right.
And how much of the lore surrounding them is actually, rooted in history.
Mm-hmm.
Let me tell you, I was surprised by some of the things I learned.
Oh, wonderful.
So to jump right in,
yeah.
the familiar grouping that we all know of, Xi Shi, Diao Chan, Wang Zhaojun, and Yang Guifei,
Okay.
as the 4 beauties.
It's actually a much more recent idea than you might think.
More recent. Really?
Yeah.
I kind of assumed that this was like something passed down for centuries,
Right.
like an ancient proverb.
You would think so, yeah.
What makes you say that it's more recent?
Well, this specific combination doesn't appear until a collection of folk ballads
Okay.
that were published in 1828
Wow.
during the Tang Dynasty.
So that's really not that long ago.
No, it's right on the eve of the Opium War.
Wow.
This idea of the 4 beauties is just starting to solidify.
So it wasn't some, like ancient text or official decree or anything.
right.
It was more like street corner gossip
Yeah.
that eventually got written down.
It's pretty unexpected.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and the first mention is actually quite humorous.
Oh,
It connects each of the 4 beauty to a man known for his impressive facial hair.
facial hair.
Yeah, a bushy beard.
A bushy beard. That's definitely not the image that I had in mind.
Right. It implies that Xi Shi was sent to the king of Wu, who had a bushy beard.
Okay.
Wang Zhaojun left behind an emperor with a bushy beard. Yang Guifei partied with An Shan, another bushy-bearded fella.
Uh-huh.
And even the fictional Diao Chan was linked to the bushy-bearded Don Juo.
Wow. So bushy beards were really in back then.
It was a style at the time.
Yeah, it's a far cry from the romantic image that we usually associate with these women.
Very much so.
But if it's a collection of folk ballads, does that mean that there were like other versions of the 4 beauties circulating before this one became so popular?
Absolutely. Oral tradition is fluid.
Right.
And there were other groupings that emphasized different aspects of beauty.
Okay.
One version includes Daji, known for fierce beauty.
Okay.
Biosi, whose smile was said to have launched 1,000 ships.
Wow.
The love snake Xi Shi.
Okay.
And Yang Guifei, famous for her beauty while intoxicated.
So each woman embodied like a specific kind of beauty.
Yes.
Almost like an archetype tied to their emotional state.
Precisely. It wasn't just about physical appearance, but about the impact of their beauty in different contexts.
That's interesting.
Daji's fury, Biosi's laughter, Xi Shi's heartache, Yang Guifei's carefree intoxication, they all held a certain allure.
That makes me wonder if like our modern focus on like singular standardized beauty standards might be missing out on some of the nuances and complexities of how beauty was appreciated in the past.
That's a really thought-provoking point.
Yeah.
And you're right, as literacy increased and written texts became more widespread, there was a push for more definitive answers, even in areas like this where oral tradition had thrived on multiple perspectives.
So the concept of the 4 beauties as we know it today
Right.
is actually a product of these desire for like a single correct answer.
It's a fascinating example of how cultural trends and ways of thinking
Yeah.
shape our perceptions, even about something as subjective as beauty.
It really is fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned Diao Chan being a fictional character. What about Xi Shi? Her story, sacrificing her love to bring down a kingdom, sounds incredibly dramatic.
Oh, it does.
Is there any historical truth to it?
This is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
That popular romantic narrative about Xi Shi and family is largely a fabrication.
Oh, really?
Yeah, to understand what really happened,
Right.
we need to look at a source called Zhuo Zuan,
Zhuo's one.
which is considered the most reliable historical account of the Wu Yu conflict.
What makes Zhuo's one a more reliable source than other texts from that time?
It's considered the closest to a contemporary account we have of this period,
Gotcha.
offering a more grounded perspective
Okay.
compared to later texts that tend to embellish the story.
Right.
Zhuo Zuan paints a picture of King Fuchai of Wu as a powerful ruler
Mhm.
with ambitions of expanding his territory.
It sounds like a lot of rulers.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
He decides to attack the state of Qi to the north,
Okay.
seeing it as an easier target than Chu or Yu.
Makes sense.
He even has a canal dug, the Hangu Canal, to make this possible.
Wasn't that canal later incorporated into the Grand Canal?
It was...
That's a pretty significant undertaking.
It is. It shows just how ambitious Fuchai was.
Wow.
But this decision to attack Qi backfires.
Oh, no.
Yeah, making enemies of the other major powers, Jin, Chu, and Qi, who then decide to support Yu against Wu.
Classic overreach.
Classic overreach leading to downfall.
Yep, but where does Xi Shi fit into all of this?
Here's the thing. Xi Shi is completely absent from Zhuo Xuan and other early records of this period.
So the central figure in this supposed beauty trap
Right.
is nowhere to be found in the most accurate historical source.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah, it's surprising, isn't it?
It really is. What about Fan Lei, her supposed lover?
Right.
Was he a real person?
Family was a real historical figure, but
Okay.
his role wasn't nearly as prominent as later stories suggest.
Okay.
He's mentioned in some sources,
Uh-huh.
but not as a key player.
Gotcha.
It seems Sima Qian, the historian who wrote Records of the Grand Historian,
Right.
romanticized Family based on legends and tales circulating centuries after the events.
So he gets elevated from a minor figure to a wise, strategic mastermind.
Exactly. Sima Qian was known for his dramatic flair and
Right.
seemed to favor these larger-than-life characters.
So if Xi Shi isn't in the early records,
Yeah.
when does she first appear in relation to the Wu Yu conflict?
Her story starts to emerge in later texts like The Spring and Autumn of Wu and Yu
Okay.
and The Lost History of Yu, written during the Han Dynasty.
Okay.
But even then, she's not the sole player in the beauty trap.
Oh,
She's sent to Wu with another beautiful woman named Xing Dan,
okay.
and her backstory is, well, not quite as glamorous as later versions suggest.
Okay, now I have to know.
Yeah.
What was Xi Shi's profession before she became this legendary spy?
She was a firewood seller?
A firewood seller.
Yeah.
That's not exactly the image of a femme fatale.
Not quite, no.
I'm picturing her wielding an axe, ready to chop her way into the Wu palace.
It does paint a rather different picture, doesn't it?
It really does.
It's not until the Wei and Jin dynasties, centuries later, that she becomes the more familiar image of a girl washing yarn by the river,
Ah, okay,
adding a
alright.
touch of poetic beauty to her character.
So her portrayal evolves from a strong, hardworking firewood seller
Yes,
to a delicate figure by the river.
precisely.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What about her fate after Wu falls? Are there different versions of that too?
There are. The most popular is the romantic ending,
Oh.
where she sails off into the sunset with Fan Li,
Okay.
but the food industry prefers a different version.
The food industry.
They like the one where she drowns.
She drowns. Why would the food industry prefer that ending?
Well, it's hard to sell a delicacy called Xi Shi's tongue if she's happily living out her days with her lover.
Oh, right.
The tragedy of her drowning adds a certain flavor to the dish.
Wow, that's a bit dark.
A little bit, yeah.
So even Xi Shi's afterlife is subject to interpretation and maybe even commercial interests.
It highlights how historical narratives, especially those passed down through oral tradition, are often a blend of fact and fiction,
Mhm.
shaped by cultural values, changing perspectives, and maybe even a desire for a good story.
That's really interesting.
Yeah,
It seems like there's a lot more to uncover about Xi Shi and the other beauties.
there is.
What else did you discover in those sources?
Well, it really makes you wonder, why do these stories, even with their inaccuracies, continue to fascinate us?
Yeah, it's a good question.
I think it's because they tap into something deeply human.
Mm-hmm.
The stories of the four beauties, that they speak to our fascination with beauty and power,
Right.
and how those two forces intertwine.
It's like a cautionary tale
Yeah.
reminding us that beauty can be like a weapon,
Right.
a source of both strength and destruction.
Yeah, exactly. And the Xi Shi story in particular
Yeah.
reveals a lot about how history gets remembered and retold.
Okay.
The regions of Wu and Yu where this conflict took place
Mhm.
were considered somewhat backward during the spring and autumn and warring states periods.
Okay.
There weren't a lot of written records from that time.
So it's kind of a historical blind slide.
Yeah.
People knew like a conflict happened, but the details were fuzzy.
Precisely.
Uh-huh.
But later, as these regions became centers of economic and cultural prosperity,
Okay.
there was a growing interest in their history.
Right.
And because there was less concrete evidence to go on,
Yeah.
it left more room for imagination and creative storytelling.
It's like a blank canvas.
Yeah.
Where people could fill in the gaps with their own interpretations, maybe even like a bit of local pride.
Exactly. And that's why today you find so many historical sites associated with Xi Shi
Right.
throughout the Jiangsu Zhejiang area.
Interesting.
It's a testament to the power of storytelling and how it can shape our understanding of the past.
It really is. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. But let's go back to that point about Wu and Yu being considered backward
Right.
during the time of the conflict.
Yeah.
The source mentioned something about social hierarchy and how it makes the whole Xi Shi story even more implausible.
Okay.
Can you explain that a little
It's
bit?
a really intriguing point.
Yeah.
Where King Guizhan,
Okay.
after being defeated by King Fuchai,
Right.
offers to send women from Yu as compensation.
Okay.
But even in this desperate situation,
Uh-huh.
he's very careful to respect the social hierarchy.
Interesting.
He proposes that the daughters of nobles be sent to serve the nobles of Wu,
Okay.
the daughters of scholars to serve the scholars of Wu, and so on.
So even in defeat, maintaining that social order was paramount.
Absolutely. And that's why sending a commoner like Xi Shi, a firewood seller, to seduce the king of Wu seems so improbable.
It would have been a huge insult.
It would have.
Yeah.
Not a clever strategy.
Wow, I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah, it really changes the context of the story.
It does.
Yeah.
If this romanticized version of Xi Shi is mostly fiction,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think these stories about the four beauties are really trying to tell us?
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
it seems these stories, even with their embellishments,
Right.
tap into some very human themes.
Okay.
They remind us of the complexities of human relationships
Mm-hmm.
and the often unpredictable consequences of ambition, desire,
Mhm.
and political maneuvering.
And the fact that they've been retold and reinterpreted for centuries
Right.
suggests they continue to resonate with us on some level.
Yeah, definitely.
We're still grappling with the same questions about beauty,
Yeah.
power, and their impact on our lives.
It's also fascinating how the image of each of the four beauties has been shaped and reshaped
Yeah,
over time to fit different cultural values and expectations.
right.
Think about how Xi Shi went from a firewood seller to a girl washing yarn by the river.
Right.
That shift alone speaks volumes about how perceptions of beauty and femininity have evolved.
It's like each generation projects its own ideals
Yeah.
onto these figures, making them both timeless
Uh-huh.
and a reflection of their own time.
Right.
And the fact that there are like multiple, even conflicting versions of their stories
Yeah.
just adds to their mystique.
It does. Yeah, that's a great observation.
Thanks.
It brings us back to the question of why these stories fascinate us, even knowing they might not be entirely true.
Right.
What do you think draws people to them?
I think we're drawn to the mystery, the
Yeah.
possibility that there's something more to these women than what's recorded in the history books.
Right.
Maybe it's our own desire to believe in the power of beauty, or maybe it's a reminder that history itself is a tapestry woven with threads of truth, speculation, and imagination.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Takes.
And it's important to remember that these stories connect to broader themes in Chinese history and culture.
Okay.
The idea of a beautiful woman being used as a tool for political gain is a recurring motif.
It reflects the power dynamics of the time.
Yeah.
Showing how women were often pawns in the games played by powerful men.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to acknowledge both the allure and the potential harm embedded in these narratives.
I agree. So besides these four,
Yeah.
were there other women considered like paragons of beauty in ancient China? Is there anyone else that we should know about?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. There were definitely other women celebrated for their beauty.
Okay.
One example that comes to mind is Lady Li,
Ladylike.
the consort of Emperor Wu of Han.
Okay.
She was renowned for her grace and elegance,
Uh-huh.
and her story even inspired a famous poem by Sima Xianggu,
Oh, wow.
one of the great poets of the Han Dynasty.
Oh, I love Sima Xianggu's work.
Oh, yeah, me too.
It's so evocative.
It is.
What was special about Lady Li's beauty? Was it just like her appearance, or was it something more?
Well, she was known for her slender figure, delicate features,
Okay.
and especially her long flowing hair.
I see.
But it was more than just physical attributes.
Okay.
Lady Li was also admired for her intelligence, her musical talent,
Wow.
and her ability to compose poetry.
So she was like a Renaissance woman of her time.
Exactly.
Beauty, brains, and artistic talent all in one package.
All in one.
And her story is kind of an interesting contrast to the four beauties.
It is, yeah.
Lady Li was loved and cherished by her emperor.
Right.
Well, the four beauties are often depicted as like tragic figures,
Yeah.
used as pawns in political schemes,
Right.
or ultimately meeting unfortunate ends.
It's true.
It's almost like their stories reflect different societal values.
It could be.
Lady Li represents like a more idealized view of womanhood,
Right.
where beauty and intellect are celebrated,
Yeah.
while the four beauties highlight like the darker side of how beauty could be exploited and manipulated.
That's a really insightful observation.
Thank
It
you.
shows how these stories can reveal a lot about the cultural anxieties and aspirations of
Yeah.
different periods in Chinese history.
This whole deep dive has really made me rethink my assumptions about beauty
Yeah.
and how it's been perceived throughout history.
Uh-huh.
It seems like it's never just about appearances, but about power, societal norms,
Right.
and even storytelling itself.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder if there are similar figures in other cultures
Yeah.
whose stories have been embellished or reinterpreted over time.
It's a good point.
Like, are there four beauties equivalents in other parts of the world?
That's a great question. Are there any examples that come to mind?
Well, figures like Cleopatra of Egypt
Uh-huh.
or Helen of Troy in Greek mythology come to mind.
Right?
Their stories have been told and retold for centuries,
Yeah.
often with conflicting details and varying degrees of historical accuracy.
It's almost like a universal human impulse to create these larger-than-life figures
Mhm.
who embody beauty, power, and intrigue.
And to use their stories to explore the complexities of our own lives and societies.
Yeah.
You know, what does it mean to be beautiful?
Right.
How does power corrupt? What
Mhm.
sacrifices are we willing to make for love or for our country?
It's so true.
These are questions that resonate across cultures and time periods.
It seems like even though we might never know the true stories of these figures,
Right.
their enduring legacy lies in the questions that they continue to provoke.
Exactly. And their stories remind us that history is not a static collection of facts,
Yeah.
but a living, breathing narrative that we constantly shape and reshape through our own interpretations and perspective.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive.
It has.
I feel like I've learned so much, not just about the four beauties, but about the nature of history itself.
And that's what's so exciting about exploring history. It's not just about memorizing facts,
Right.
but about engaging with the past in a way that challenges our assumptions and sparks our curiosity.
I couldn't agree more.
Good.
To everyone listening, if you enjoyed this deep dive into the four beauties, keep asking questions, keep digging deeper, and keep exploring those fascinating and often surprising stories that make up our shared human history.
It's a great big world out there.
You never know what hidden gems you might uncover. Okay, ready to dive in?
Absolutely.
Great. Today, we're going deep into Tang Dynasty China.
Ooh.
We're talking emperors and empresses, poets, and Yeah, all the power struggles you can imagine.
You said it.
And from all that chaos and intrigue, one name really jumped out at us.
Yeah, Shangguan Wan'er. Really remarkable woman.
Exactly.
It's fascinating,
True.
right? She doesn't fit into any easy category.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
High-ranking official, celebrated poet, master political player.
And you know her story.
Oh, yeah!
Full of twists and turns.
Like a modern thriller.
Absolutely.
Speaking of twists,
Yeah.
you found this prophecy about her birth.
Right, with the way the world thing.
Right, way the world.
Yeah.
What do you think? Like a PR stunt, or was it real?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say for sure, but it definitely sets the stage
Right.
for this idea of her having a massive influence
Yeah, from birth.
from birth. Yeah.
It's almost like foreshadowing.
Totally.
And to think she ended up in such a unique position,
Oh, yeah, in the Tang court.
especially with Wu Zetian in power.
Oh, Wu Zetian, come on.
China's only female emperor.
It's amazing.
Now, some sources really paint her as
Yeah.
strong-willed, ruthless even.
Yeah, no, totally.
I mean, was Shangguan Wan'er like that too?
Cut from the same cloth.
Right.
I mean, think about it. She was Wu Zetian's, what, trusted advisor?
Yeah, advisor, secretary.
Even drafting?
Oh, drafting imperial decrees.
That's huge.
That wasn't just about being smart.
No.
You had to understand Wu Zetian,
Her vision.
her political vision, deeply.
Totally. So
yeah.
wielding power like that
Yeah.
in the shadow of this, I mean, incredible empress.
What does that say about Shangguan Wan'er?
Right. Like, what were her ambitions?
It seems like she really thrived in that environment.
Yeah.
And her influence didn't end when Wu Zetian died. Emperor Zhongzong takes the throne, and she's still prominent.
So she's holding on to that influence
Yeah.
with an emperor like Zhongzong.
Oh, he was known for being, well, let's say, indecisive.
Yeah, putting it mildly, maybe.
Right.
What do the sources say about?
About how she wielded that power.
Yeah, how did she handle that?
That was a delicate dance, really.
I bet.
Some historians even think that Wu Zetian
Mm-hmm.
might have set it up for Shangguan Wan'er to keep rising.
Really?
You see, she became Emperor Zhongzong's concubine.
Which sounds like a, I don't know.
Demotion.
Yeah, on the surface.
Yeah, but it wasn't that simple, was it?
Right. One source even calls her like a leader in the literary world.
Oh, absolutely. Picture this. Bustling salons, like near the Western Market.
Wow.
Drawing in all the best poets.
And scholars.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a hobby.
Not at all. She was shaping the intellectual landscape.
Of the entire Tang Dynasty.
Oh, pretty amazing.
And her own poetry, it wasn't just like,
Beautiful.
yeah, beautiful. It was ambitious.
It was. This story about the Kunming pool competition,
Oh, yeah.
that's a good one. She's the judge there, basically deciding,
Whose work gets immortalized?
right, by the emperor's musicians.
And it came down to two, right?
2 finalists, both incredibly skilled.
But she picks the one.
The one whose poem really resonated.
Yeah, with ambition.
Ambition, refusal to be overlooked.
I love that.
And if you looked at the themes of that winning poem,
Yeah.
striving for greatness, overcoming obstacles, this bold voice that demands to be heard.
That's Shangguan Wan'er.
It's almost like her own journey.
Mirroring it.
Exactly.
Wow.
Now, your sources also hint at this fascinating overlap between her love life
Yeah.
and her political climb.
Okay, so let's see how those,
Intertwined.
yeah, intertwine.
Was it real love or just strategy?
Yeah. Or maybe both.
Maybe both.
Who knows?
Let's start with Wu Sanxi,
Okay.
Wu Zetian's nephew. Big political implications there.
Especially after Wu Zetian's death.
Right, because the new regime...
Not exactly friendly to rivals.
No, not at all. Wu Sanxi was in a very precarious position.
He could have been.
Executed. But Shangguan Wan'er uses her influence.
Yeah.
Introduces him to Empress Wei.
Emperor Zhongzong's wife.
Right, and Empress Wei, also quite ambitious.
Okay, so now we've got another powerful woman in the mix.
Right.
Was she an ally or a rival to Shangguan Wan'er?
That's what makes it interesting. They formed an alliance.
Really?
They both had ambition.
Wow.
And together,
Yeah.
they convince Emperor Zhongzong
Yeah.
to spare Wu Sanxi,
Yep.
and he ends up with a major role at court.
So she's using her personal connections
Yeah.
to shift the entire political landscape.
Powerful stuff.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And did she do this?
And her later lover.
Yeah. Xi Shi.
Yes. She championed his career as well.
Really? To what extent?
He became prime minister.
Wow. That's incredible.
Pulling strings, right?
Talk about pulling the strings.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how much was strategy?
Yeah.
How much was genuine affection?
What do you think?
I mean, I don't know, right?
It's a question that people still debate.
Yeah.
Was she in love with these men?
Or were they
Pawns.
pawns in her game?
The sources don't give us easy answers.
That's what makes it so intriguing, though, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it's like this Shakespearean drama
Right.
playing out in the Tang court.
Love, ambition, danger.
Well, mixed together.
A potent mix.
Absolutely.
And it's only going to get more complicated from here.
I'm ready for it.
All right, let's dive deeper then. Oh, yeah, much more complicated.
I bet.
It's like all these relationships playing out
Yeah.
against this backdrop of constantly shifting power.
In the Tang court.
Right. No one was ever truly safe.
Oh, I bet. There were always bloody.
Rivals
Yeah.
vying for influence.
And things could get, well,
Violence.
violent.
And this brings us to
Yeah.
a pretty pivotal event. You marked it in your notes.
Oh, yeah, the Li Changjun rebellion.
That's the one.
So we see Shangguan Wan'er's, I don't know, like her cunning,
Yeah,
but also maybe the beginning of her downfall.
it's possible.
So who was this Li Changjun? What made him rebel?
Well, he was Emperor Zhongzong's crown prince.
Okay.
But his position...
Not exactly secure.
No. Remember Empress Wei?
Oh, yeah, and her ambition.
She favored her own daughter, Princess Anne.
Okay.
Wanted her to be a crown princess.
So using your kid as a pawn, wow.
That's ambition, right?
That's a whole other level.
Ruthlessness of the Tang court. And Shangguan Wan'er,
Yeah.
she was aligned with them. With Empress Wei and Princess Anne,
Okay.
Li Changjun and his supporters, they saw her as an obstacle.
So direct threat to his claim to the throne.
Exactly. And his own father, I mean,
Emperor Zhongzong.
yeah, easily swayed by Empress Wei.
So Li Changjun felt like he had no choice but to...
Take drastic action.
This wasn't just like a palace argument.
No, this was a full-blown rebellion.
What did he do?
Gathered a force, launched a coup.
And went after.
Wu Sanxi first.
And they
That's
were...
all.
Wow. So Shangguan Wan'er is like right in the middle of this.
Right, in the thick of...
Aligned with the people Li Changjun is trying to get rid of.
Right.
That's exactly what happened next
Well, Li Changjun, he storms the palace.
with his men.
Yeah, aiming to take out Empress Wei,
Under
Princess Anne, and...
Shangguan Wan'er.
That's right.
That's terrifying. What did she do?
She was quick thinking,
Yeah.
heard the commotion, knew it was dangerous,
Uh-huh.
rushed to the emperor's quarters,
Really?
alerted him, Empress Wei too,
Wow.
got them to safety
Way.
in the tower above the Xuanwu Gate.
She saved their lives?
Potentially, yes.
Wow. What about her, though? Did she escape?
More than that, she countered the threat, summoned the imperial guards.
Oh, wow. A much larger force.
Much larger. Li Changjun's rebellion crushed.
It's a bold move.
It was.
And it paid off. But I imagine surviving something like that,
Yeah,
it must have had a lasting impact.
it did. One source even mentions a warning
Warning?
from her cousin
Really?
before the rebellion.
What did he say?
Urged her to reconsider her alliances, you know?
Okay.
Saw the danger in siding with Wu Sanxi.
And Empress Wei.
Right. He predicted this kind of upheaval.
Why?
And Shangguan Wan'er, at the time,
Yeah.
confident in her position.
It's like that warning
Yeah.
must have stuck with her.
After the rebellion, yeah.
I mean, a brush with death like that.
It makes you reevaluate things.
That
Oh.
choices, your allies.
And that's what she did.
So what changed? How did she shift her strategy?
She realized she needed to diversify her allegiances.
To survive.
The next power struggle.
Because there's always another one, right?
Always.
So who does she turn to?
Well, she makes a maybe surprising move.
Yeah.
Keeps her ties with Empress Wei's faction.
Right.
But secretly starts reaching out the opposition.
Okay.
Prince Yang, Emperor Zhongzong's brother,
Okay.
and his son Li Longji.
Li Longji, the future emperor.
That's right.
That's a dangerous game.
It was. He was a threat to everything she'd built.
But she was pragmatic, right?
Above all else,
So she saw
the growing influence.
of Prince Shang's faction.
Yeah. And within that faction,
Yeah.
a key figure, Princess Taiping.
Wait, Wu Zixin's daughter.
The very same.
But she was loyal to Wu Zixin.
It might seem contradictory.
Yeah.
But Shangguan Wan'er, she knew
Yeah.
Princess Taiping. She understood the game.
As a woman in court.
Right. For years,
So she's playing both sides.
hoping to secure her position.
No matter who wins.
Brilliant strategy, maybe a fatal miscalculation.
Well, we're wrong.
Well, she underestimated Li Longji.
Okay.
Fast.
Okay, you mentioned his aversion to women in power. Because of his past. What
Yeah,
happened?
I
His past. Yeah. What happened?
Well, just imagine, growing up.
Yeah.
knowing your own grandmother orchestrated your mother's death.
That's heavy stuff.
It is. That's Li Longji's reality.
Wow.
His grandmother, the Empress, responsible for his mother's death.
So, of course he's going to be wary of...
Women in power.
Yeah.
Makes sense, right?
Totally.
And this really influenced his actions.
Yeah. How so?
Made him cautious and calculating. Ruthless, even, when it came to protecting his family.
And his ambitions.
Exactly. Shangguan Wan'er was focused on Princess Taiping.
Right. Trying to secure her position.
But she didn't see the force that Li Longji represented?
She misjudged him.
In a way, yes. And then, Emperor Zhong's death.
Okay, yeah, the sources on that are...
A bit murky.
Yeah, some say he was poisoned.
The official records blame Princess Anne.
But then her epitaph...
suggests a different story.
Yeah, like maybe her husband was responsible.
It's hard to say for sure, but his death, it throws the court into chaos.
Oh yeah, I bet. Total upheaval.
Empress Wei, she sees her chance.
To seize control.
Exactly. Sets up this young emperor, easy to manipulate.
But Li Longji?
Not gonna stand for that.
No way.
He launches his own coup.
Against Empress Wei.
Takes her faction by surprise.
Wow. Didn't even tell his father.
Prince Yang, no. Feared hesitation.
Or even...
betrayal.
So he's acting alone.
Driven by years of resentment.
And ambition.
A lot of ambition.
Oh.
To reshape the Tang Dynasty.
It's a bold move. Where's Shangguan Wan'er in all this?
Caught in the middle.
Trying to survive.
The sources say she tries to save herself. She drafts a document, thinks it'll guarantee her safety.
But it's too late.
Li Longji's forces, they storm the palace. She's killed.
Despite her pleas.
It's a tragic end.
Yeah, for someone so skilled at maneuvering the court.
It shows how even the most cunning...
can't always control.
Yeah.
It makes you think about her legacy.
What do you think it is?
I don't know. Was she a feminist icon?
Pushing boundaries?
Or women?
Or was she a ruthless climber?
Willing to do anything.
Survive.
The sources are complicated.
They are. She embodies these contradictions.
This is so fascinating.
Exactly.
She was a product of her time, for sure.
Shaped by the brutality of the court.
But she carved out her own space.
Wielded influence.
Shaped events.
In a way few women ever could.
So what do we learn from her story?
I think it makes us think about ambition.
The compromises we make.
For power.
And the price we pay.
For our choices.
Shangguan Wan'er's story, it's a reminder.
Yeah.
That history is never simple.
Never black and white.
It's full of these shades of gray.
Compelling characters.
And lessons that last.
For centuries.
Definitely gives us a lot to think about.
Yeah.
As we wrap up, I'm left wondering.
Yeah.
What if she had made different choices?
Like what?
Like what if she'd seen Li Longji's rise coming?
Aligned herself with him.
Could she have held on to power?
Or was she always going to be a tragic figure?
A victim of the world she lived in.
A world that maybe wasn't ready for her.
It's a question worth pondering.
It is, as we keep exploring history.
And its many amazing figures.
It's through these stories
that we learn about ourselves.
Our complexities.
The power of ambition.
And the enduring mysteries of the past.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
My pleasure. Until next time. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into the fascinating story of Shangguan Wan'er.
Ooh, interesting.
A woman in the Tang Dynasty.
Okay.
Who rose to a pretty prominent position in the political sphere.
I've heard of her, yeah.
Imagine going from a palace servant.
Wow.
To having serious influence in the court.
That's quite a jump.
It's a really wild story, and her journey is anything but ordinary.
Yeah, definitely not your typical path to power.
We're going to be working with what seems like a lecture on some notable Chinese figures.
Interesting.
And there's a lot to unpack here, trust me.
I bet.
The big question that we're trying to get to the bottom of is, was Shangguan Wan'er a brilliant political strategist?
Okay.
Someone who could navigate the really dangerous waters of the court?
Right.
Or was she kind of swept away by forces beyond her control?
It's a question that's fascinated historians for a long time.
Yeah.
To really understand her story, I think you have to understand the complexities of the Tang court in general.
Okay, yeah.
All the ambition, the constantly shifting alliances.
Yeah. That was intense.
And especially the unique risks women face.
Wait, for sure.
When they dared to hold power.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
So let's start with her rise to power, which is pretty unusual. I was pretty amazed to learn she wasn't born into, like, privilege or anything.
Right.
In fact, she entered the palace as a servant.
Oh, wow.
Because of her grandfather's actions against the state. It's a pretty unusual path to political influence, to say the least.
Absolutely, yeah. That speaks volumes about her ambition. But you'd imagine, navigating that environment. You're not just a servant, but you carry this weight of your family's past actions against the state.
Yeah, like starting from a deficit almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
But she possessed this remarkable mix of intelligence and literary talent
Oh, interesting.
that couldn't be ignored.
It sounds like she really knew how to use words to captivate people,
Yes,
even in a setting where it might have been safer for her to stay quiet.
that's a great point.
Yeah.
This ability to use her words to command attention
Uh-huh.
caught the eye of Empress Wu Zetian,
Wow.
arguably one of the most powerful figures in Chinese history.
I mean, talk about a powerful mentor.
Right?
To be taken under the wing of the only woman to ever rule China in her own right.
It's amazing.
What do you think Empress Wu saw in her? What qualities or skills did Shangguan Wan'er have that really made her stand out?
That is a fascinating question. I mean, Empress Wu shattered so many barriers herself.
She did.
She must have recognized something of a kindred spirit in Shangguan Wan'er
Right.
beyond just her talent.
Yeah.
I think she saw a really sharp mind,
Okay.
capable of strategy, understanding court dynamics, and maybe even a shared ambition.
Right, like recognizing those qualities in herself in a way.
Yeah.
Wow.
And under Empress Wu's guidance, Shangguan Wan'er's role expanded very quickly.
Okay.
She went from drafting edicts to essentially running the show behind the scenes,
Oh.
managing state affairs,
Yeah.
becoming a trusted advisor.
I wonder what their dynamic was like. You think they ever clashed?
Yeah.
Was there genuine trust there? Or was it more of a strategic alliance?
Yeah.
Out of necessity?
Right.
Because just think about the pressure of being in that inner circle.
Oh.
You'd constantly be having to prove yourself,
Absolutely.
outmaneuver your rivals.
Oh, yeah. It's easy to imagine the tension in the corridors of power.
Oh, yeah.
Court politics, especially in a dynasty as complex as the Tang, were rarely straightforward.
I bet.
Every action, every word carried weight. And that brings us to a pivotal event,
Okay.
the Tanglong coup,
Right.
which changed the landscape of the court
Yeah.
and ultimately sealed Shangguan Wan'er's fate.
Yeah, you're right. The Tanglong coup is a major turning point in the story.
Big time.
Could you set the stage for us? What events led up to this upheaval?
Sure. Well, it all started with the sudden death of Emperor Zhongzong.
Okay.
And this created, as you can imagine, a huge power vacuum.
Wow.
This is where ambition and opportunity collide. Empress Wei, his wife, and their daughter, Princess Anil,
Okay.
they saw their chance to seize control.
Oh, wow.
And remember, the Tang Dynasty had already seen a woman rule in her own right with Empress Wu.
That's true.
So it wasn't completely inconceivable that history might repeat itself,
Yeah.
this time with Empress Wei at the helm.
So the stakes were incredibly high.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone vying for power. Alliances are shifting.
Absolutely.
And in the middle of all this is Shangguan Wan'er,
Right.
tasked with drafting the late emperor's will.
Uh-huh.
All the pressure she must felt.
Exactly.
Caught between these competing factions, each with their own agendas.
Yeah.
So her initial draft attempted to balance the power
Okay.
between Empress Wei and Prince Laidan,
Mhm.
who was the emperor's designated heir,
Right.
by proposing that they rule jointly.
Oh, interesting.
It seems like a pretty pragmatic solution,
Yeah.
trying to appease both sides and maintain some stability.
That makes sense.
It does, yeah. But did Empress Wei even accept this compromise? Knowing her ambition, I have a feeling she wasn't too keen on sharing the throne.
You're absolutely right. Empress Wei was not interested in sharing power with anyone.
Wow.
She completely rejected Shangguan Wan'er's draft
Oh, wow.
and had her own version drawn up,
Really?
completely sidelining Prince Laidan
Oh, my gosh.
and consolidating her own control.
Wow, that's bold.
Bold move.
Yeah.
Demonstrates her hunger for that absolute authority
Yeah?
and also kind of reveals her ruthlessness,
Yeah.
that willingness to disregard tradition
Yeah.
and, the established line of succession in her pursuit of power.
This rejection must have sent shockwaves through the court.
I'm sure.
It's a direct challenge to Prince Laidan's claim.
Yes,
And a blatant power grab by Empress Wei.
totally.
Did she underestimate the potential consequences of her actions?
Perhaps she did, because this audacious move really triggered a backlash.
Okay.
It ignited the very coup she had hoped to avoid.
Oh, wow.
Prince Laidan's son, Li Longji,
Oh.
rose up in defiance,
Okay.
determined to restore his father's rightful claim to the throne.
Wow.
The Tanglong coup was born out of this clash of ambitions,
Uh-huh.
a direct response to Empress Wei's overreach.
So Li Longji's not only defending his father's legacy,
Right.
but he's also asserting his own claim to power.
Exactly.
What a tangled web of loyalties and ambitions.
It is, right?
Where does Shangguan Wan'er fit into all this chaos?
Well, she's right in the crosshairs of this power struggle.
Oh, no.
Remember, she had drafted that initial will
Mhm.
that attempted to balance the power, and she still held a copy of it.
Oh, interesting.
So when Li Longji's forces captured her during the coup,
Okay.
she tried to use this draft as proof of her loyalty to the rightful heir.
Oh, wow.
Imagine the scene. She's pleading her case, presenting this document as evidence of her intentions,
Oh, my God.
hoping to save her own life.
What a moment.
Right.
She's essentially betting on Li Longji's mercy,
Yeah,
hoping he'll see her as an ally instead of an enemy.
exactly.
Did her gamble pay off?
Sadly, it did not.
Oh, no.
Despite her attempts to prove her loyalty,
Uh-huh.
Li Longji ordered her execution.
Wow.
It was a brutal and decisive move
Yeah.
that silenced a powerful voice in the court
Righty.
and eliminated a potential threat to his newfound authority.
Wow. That is chilling. It seems like even her intellect and, strategic maneuvering couldn't save her in the end. But why execute her? I mean, wouldn't someone with her experience and knowledge be invaluable to a new ruler?
Well, her execution has puzzled historians for centuries.
I bet.
There are a number of theories,
Okay.
each offering a glimpse into how complex the situation really was.
Okay.
First, Li Longji may have felt he needed to appease public sentiment.
Okay.
Shangguan Wan'er was very closely associated with Empress Wei's regime,
Right.
which had become synonymous with corruption and instability.
Yeah.
So eliminating her could be seen as this symbolic act,
Okay.
distancing himself from the previous administration and signaling a fresh start.
Right. So there's a political strategy there
Yes.
to really solidify his position by distancing himself from what people saw as the evils of the previous regime.
Exactly.
Like a public display of power,
Yeah.
showcasing control and sending a message to potential rivals.
Right, right. But was public appeasement the only motive?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. What else could it have been?
Well, remember Empress Wu?
Right.
Li Longji may have been wary of another powerful woman rising to a prominent position in the court,
Yeah.
potentially challenging his own authority.
Right.
So eliminating Shangguan Wan'er could have been a preemptive strike
Okay.
to avoid history repeating itself.
Right. That's a good point. It really speaks to, I guess, the deeply ingrained fear of female power in a patriarchal society.
Absolutely.
By removing Shangguan Wan'er, Li Longji might have been trying to reassert traditional power structures, ensuring that men remained at the helm of the Tang Dynasty.
It's a perspective we can't ignore. And then there's a third theory, maybe even more compelling,
Okay.
that centers around Princess Taiping.
Ah, Princess Taiping, the emperor's sister,
Exactly.
a major force in court politics.
Yes.
She and Li Longji later became bitter rivals,
She did.
locked in their own struggle for power.
Yes. And they were known to be close allies.
Princess Taiping and Shangguan Wan'er.
Yes. Sharing political ambitions and strategies.
Okay.
And Li Longji was always calculating
Right.
and wary of potential threats.
Yeah.
He likely feared an alliance between them.
Right.
So by eliminating Shangguan Wan'er,
Yeah.
he was not only neutralizing a powerful figure
Okay.
associated with the previous regime,
Yeah.
but also striking a blow against his future rival, Princess Taiping.
That's where things get really interesting.
Right.
Shangguan Wan'er becomes a pawn in this much larger game of power,
Yeah.
caught between Li Longji's ambition and Princess Taiping's influence.
Exactly.
That's classic, eliminate your enemies before they become too powerful. A preemptive strike to secure his position in the court.
Right. But the story doesn't end there.
Oh.
A very different perspective
How's that?
emerges from Shangguan Wan'er's own epitaph.
Oh, interesting.
A fascinating document
Okay.
that really adds another layer of complexity to her story.
Okay, so we've got conflicting accounts.
We do.
I love it when that happens.
Yeah.
What does the epitaph reveal about Shangguan Wan'er's role in the events leading up to the coup?
Well, according to Princess Taiping's account,
Okay.
Shangguan Wan'er fiercely opposed Empress Wei and Princess Ansel's attempts to seize power.
Okay.
It paints her as this loyal figure
No.
who resisted their ambitions,
Yeah.
even going to extreme lengths
Oh, wow.
to demonstrate her disapproval
Right.
and protect the rightful heir.
So that's a pretty big shift from those historical accounts that place her firmly on Empress Wei's side.
Right.
What kind of extreme lengths are we talking about?
Well, the epitaph describes her pleading with the emperor,
Okay.
attempting to resign from her position, and even, allegedly, attempting suicide
Oh my gosh.
to prevent Princess Anne from being named crown princess.
Wow.
It paints a picture of a woman deeply troubled by the events,
Uh-huh.
someone willing to risk everything
Right.
to uphold what she believed was right.
Wow. So we have two very different versions of Shangguan Wan'er here.
We do.
The loyal servant who resisted corruption
Yes.
versus the shrewd political operator who aligned herself with whoever held power.
Right.
It's a real historical puzzle, isn't it?
It is.
Trying to figure out,
Yeah.
like, what really happened.
It really is. And it raises important questions about the reliability of historical sources.
For sure.
How do we reconcile these conflicting accounts?
Right.
Which version of events is closer to the truth?
Yeah.
We have to consider the motives behind each narrative,
Okay.
the potential biases of the authors,
Right.
and the context in which these accounts were created.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like piecing together a puzzle where some of the pieces might be missing or deliberately altered. Right.
We have to sift through the layers of interpretation and
Right.
consider who benefits from each version of the story.
You're right. It's like being a historical detective,
Exactly.
trying to uncover the truth amidst conflicting testimonies and hidden agendas.
Absolutely.
So let's examine the evidence. We know that Empress Wei continued to trust Shangguan Wan'er with drafting the will, even after these alleged protests and acts of defiance that were described in the epitaph.
Right.
Doesn't that kind of contradict the idea that Shangguan Wan'er was actively working against her?
It's a valid point. If Empress Wei really believed that Shangguan Wan'er was a threat
Yeah.
or opposed to her ambitions,
Right.
why entrust her with such a crucial task?
Yeah, exactly.
It suggests a level of trust that doesn't really line up with, like, outright rebellion,
Right.
does it?
No, it doesn't.
No.
And there's another piece of the puzzle that seems to support this.
Okay.
The historical records indicate that Shangguan Wan'er's demotion from Zhao Rong to Jiyu.
And those titles, by the way, give us a little glimpse into the court hierarchy. Zerong being a higher rank than Jiyu.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and it wasn't due to any political disagreements,
Okay.
but rather because she was mourning her mother's death. This detail further undermines the image of her as a defiant rebel actively working against Empress Wei.
It does. Those are important pieces of the puzzle
Yeah.
that seem to align more closely with the traditional historical accounts.
Okay.
It suggests that
Yeah.
while Shangguan Wan'er might have had reservations about Empress Wei's actions,
Yeah.
her role in the court was more complex than simply being a staunch opponent.
Right, right. Okay, so if we're leaning towards the traditional accounts as being more reliable in this case,
Yeah.
it begs the question, why would Princess Taiping create such a drastically different portrayal of Shangguan Wan'er in the epitaph? What purpose did it serve to paint her as this heroic figure who resisted tyranny?
It's crucial to remember that epitaphs, much like eulogies, tend to emphasize the positive qualities of the deceased.
Right.
It's not uncommon to find these glowing tributes
Sure.
and selective omissions in posthumous accounts.
Right, so it's kind of like presenting an idealized version of someone, highlighting their virtues
Yeah.
while downplaying any less than flattering parts of their life.
Exactly. And in this case, Princess Taiping's motives might have gone beyond just honoring her friend and ally.
Right, because remember, she's a powerful political player in her own right.
Exactly.
And her relationship with Shangguan Wan'er was deeply intertwined with their shared ambitions.
Exactly. So the epitaph could be more than just a personal tribute.
Okay, I'm starting to see where you're going with this.
It could be a subtle form of political maneuvering.
Right.
By depicting Shangguan Wan'er as an innocent victim who opposed Empress Wei and Princess Asla.
Yeah.
Princess Taiping achieves a couple of things. First, she elevates Shangguan Wan'er to this almost martyr-like status.
Okay.
Someone who fought for justice and suffered for it.
Right.
And this implicitly criticizes Li Longji's actions.
Oh, interesting.
Portraying him as this ruthless leader who eliminated a virtuous figure.
So it's a subtle way to undermine Li Longji's legitimacy,
Exactly.
casting doubt on his judgment.
Yes.
And by extension, it could also be seen as bolstering Princess Taiping's own position,
Absolutely.
presenting herself as the true defender of justice and righteousness.
Yes, yes. It's a clever political strategy. Using the epitaph as a tool to shape public perception
Yeah.
and advance her own agenda.
Wow.
It reminds us that history is often written by the victors,
Right.
but it can also be rewritten and reframed
Right.
by those who seek to challenge the dominant narrative.
That's so true. This whole story highlights how power dynamics can shape not only events,
Right.
but also the way those events are remembered and interpreted.
Yes.
It's a reminder to be critical of the information that we receive
Absolutely.
and to consider the motives of those who control the narrative.
Yes.
But let's not forget, Shangguan Wan'er's death wasn't just a personal tragedy.
Or a political pawn in a larger game.
Right.
It had a profound impact on the course of the Tang Dynasty.
It did. You're absolutely right. Her execution was a catalyst
Okay.
for the power struggle
Uh-huh.
that would consume the court in the years to come.
Oh, wow.
It marked the beginning of this bitter rivalry
Okay.
between Li Longji and Princess Taiping,
Right.
a clash of ambitions that would really shape the destiny of the Tang Dynasty.
So this one event,
Yeah.
the elimination of a single figure,
Uh-huh.
sets off this chain reaction
Yes.
that will redefine the political landscape.
Exactly.
What were the immediate consequences of Shangguan Wan'er's death? Did it tip the scales in favor of either Li Longji or Princess Taiping?
Well, in the short term, Li Longji emerged as the dominant force. He successfully seized control, eliminated his rivals, solidified his position as the new emperor.
All right.
However, Princess Taiping wasn't one to back down easily.
Of course not.
She still held a lot of influence in the court,
Yeah.
and her ambition was as strong as ever.
So the game is far from over.
No,
It sounds like the stage is set for a showdown
it is.
between these two powerful figures,
Yeah.
each vying for control of the Tang Dynasty. Do you think Li Longji underestimated Princess Taiping's resilience and her determination to challenge his authority?
Perhaps he did.
Yeah.
Because the execution of Shangguan Wan'er, while intended to weaken Princess Taiping's influence,
Right.
might inadvertently fueled her determination to fight back.
Oh, interesting.
It could be seen as a personal affront,
Right.
a challenge that she couldn't ignore.
Right. It's fascinating how those actions that are intended to, consolidate power
Yeah.
can sometimes have the opposite effect,
Yeah.
provoking a backlash from those who feel threatened or marginalized.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that power is a very delicate and often unpredictable force. Did this tension between Li Longji and Princess Taiping escalate into open conflict?
It most certainly did.
Okay.
Their rivalry intensified,
Uh-huh.
leading to this period of political maneuvering,
Oh, wow.
betrayals,
Okay.
and purges as each side attempted to outmaneuver the other.
Wow.
It was a dangerous game of political chess,
Yeah.
where the stakes were incredibly high.
And in this game of chess, Shangguan Wan'er's legacy became a really powerful symbol.
Yes.
Li Longji's decision to execute her, regardless of her true intentions,
Right.
continued to haunt him.
Yes.
It became this rallying point for Princess Taiping's supporters,
Right.
a reminder of his ruthlessness,
Yeah.
and a symbol of the injustice inflicted upon this talented and influential woman.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a testament to the enduring power of symbols
Yes.
and narratives,
Uh-huh.
particularly in the world of politics.
Yes.
Sometimes the way events are perceived and interpreted
Right.
can be just as impactful as the events themselves.
I agree.
But this constant tension, this struggle for power, it couldn't last forever.
It couldn't.
How did this rivalry between Li Longji and Princess Taiping ultimately resolve?
Well, after years of maneuvering and escalating conflict. Yeah.
Li Longji prevailed.
Okay.
He successfully outmaneuvered Princess Taiping,
Okay.
forcing her to commit suicide
Oh, wow.
and consolidating his control over the Tang Dynasty.
So Li Longji finally achieved his goal of undisputed power.
He did.
But it came at a considerable cost. The Tang court had been ravaged by years of infighting
Yes.
and bloodshed,
Yes.
leaving scars that would take time to heal.
It's true. His victory wasn't without consequences.
Right.
The purges and executions that came with his rise to power
Yeah,
left a lingering sense of unease and paranoia in the court.
I bet.
No one was safe from suspicion,
Right?
and even the slightest hint of disloyalty could be met with, swift and brutal punishment.
Yeah. That atmosphere of fear must have really stifled dissent and creativity, making it difficult for anyone to challenge Li Longji's authority or offer alternative viewpoints.
Did he take any further actions to, ensure the complete erasure of his rivals, including Shangguan Wan'er from
Yeah.
the historical record,
To further cement his authority. Okay.
and eliminate any reminders of his rivals?
Mm-hmm.
Li Longji took a decisive step. He ordered the destruction of Shangguan Wan'er's tomb.
Wow, that's a powerful statement.
Yeah.
It wasn't enough to have executed her.
Right.
He wanted to obliterate any trace of her existence, her legacy, her contributions to the Tang Dynasty,
Yes.
it almost seems vindictive.
It does.
Like he feared that even her tomb might become a rallying point for dissent.
Right.
Or a reminder of the tumultuous past.
Yeah.
It's a testament to how thoroughly Li Longji sought to consolidate his power and reshape the narrative of his reign.
Right.
He wanted to control not only the present, but also the perception of the past.
Absolutely.
Ensuring that history remembered him as the undisputed ruler
Yes.
who brought stability and prosperity to the Tang Dynasty.
Yes. Yes. What a story.
I know, right? We've gone from the heights of Shangguan Wan'er's influence in the Tang court
Yeah.
to her tragic demise,
Right.
caught in the crossfire of a power struggle that she couldn't escape. Her life was this complex tapestry of talent, ambition, and political maneuvering.
Yeah.
She faced incredible challenges
Yeah.
and achieved remarkable things in a world that was dominated by men.
Her story is a reminder that women have always been active participants in shaping history.
Yes.
Even when their voices have been silenced or their contributions overlooked.
Absolutely. Shangguan Wan'er's intelligence,
Yeah.
resilience, and ability to navigate those complexities of the Tang court
Yeah.
serve as a powerful example of the impact women have had on history,
Yes.
often behind the scenes or in the face of immense challenges.
It makes you think about the countless other women
Yes.
whose stories might have been lost to time, their voices silenced, their contributions overlooked.
It's true. And Shangguan Wan'er's story, in a way, represents them as well.
Yeah, it does.
It reminds us to dig deeper, to
Right.
question the traditional narratives,
Yeah.
and to seek out those untold stories that really enrich our understanding of the past.
It's a call to be more critical consumers of history,
Absolutely.
to acknowledge that the stories we're told are often shaped by those in power,
Yes.
and that there are always multiple perspectives
Yes.
waiting to be uncovered.
Yes. Yes. And by exploring those different viewpoints,
Yeah.
we can gain a more nuanced and complete understanding of the past,
Right.
and in turn, a better understanding of ourselves and the world we live in today.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Shangguan Wan'er's world,
Yes.
I'm left with this kind of lingering question.
Okay.
Did she ultimately wield power, or was she controlled by it?
That's the central dilemma, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a question that's haunted historians for centuries.
Yeah.
Was she a master manipulator
Right.
who used her intelligence and influence to advance her own agenda?
Uh-huh.
Or was she a pawn caught
Yeah.
in a game far bigger than herself,
Yeah.
ultimately a victim of circumstance?
It's hard to say for sure. The historical record, it's incomplete.
Yeah.
And the surviving accounts, they're often like contradictory or biased.
Right.
We're left to piece together these fragments of her life,
Yeah.
weigh the evidence, consider, the motivations of those who wrote about her,
Absolutely.
and ultimately draw our own conclusions.
Yeah, and perhaps that's the beauty of history.
Yeah.
It's not always about finding these definitive answers,
Okay.
but rather about having a dialogue with the past, wrestling with those ambiguities,
Right.
and really recognizing the complexity of human nature.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shangguan Wan'er's story really invites us to do that,
It does.
to think critically,
Right.
to question those assumptions,
Yeah.
and to grapple with those really enduring questions of
Right.
power, ambition,
Yeah.
and the choices we make when we're facing adversity.
It's also a reminder that power is a double-edged sword.
Absolutely.
It can be a force for good,
Yes.
a tool for creating change, advancing justice,
Right.
but it can also corrupt,
Yes, it can.
leading to ruthlessness,
Yes.
oppression,
Uh-huh.
and the silencing of dissenting voices.
Absolutely. And in Shangguan Wan'er's case,
Yeah.
she seemed to navigate that duality of power
Right.
with remarkable skill,
Uh-huh.
using her influence to advance her career
Right.
and achieve a level of prominence that was really rare
Yeah,
for a woman in her time.
for sure.
But ultimately, she became entangled
Right.
in those very power struggles that she had so adeptly navigated.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even the most astute and ambitious individuals
Right.
can be swept away by forces beyond their control.
Right.
It's true.
Her story leaves us with so many questions to ponder.
It does.
Did she ever regret the choices she made? Did she truly believe in the causes she supported?
Right.
Or was she just trying to survive
Yeah.
in this treacherous political landscape?
Hard to know.
Yeah, these are questions we can only speculate about,
It can.
but I think they offer really valuable insights
They do.
into the human condition.
Yes.
Those dilemmas that we face when power and morality collide.
That's a great point, and perhaps that's the most valuable lesson that we can get from Shangguan Wan'er's story.
Okay.
It's a reminder that even when we're faced with, like, overwhelming odds, we have the power to make choices, to shape our destinies, and to leave a mark on the world, even if it's a mark that is contested, debated, and ultimately erased from the official record.
I hope this deep dive into Shangguan Wan'er's world has sparked your curiosity.
Me too.
And inspired you to, learn more about this fascinating period of history.
It's a great period.
It is. What about you? Any final thoughts?
I would just encourage everyone to, seek out those hidden stories, to question the narratives that you encounter, and to really embrace the complexities and the ambiguities of the past.
For sure. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring.
Yes.
Keep questioning. And keep diving deeper.
In a game far bigger than herself, ultimately a victim of circumstance.
It's hard to say for sure. The historical record, it's incomplete. And the surviving accounts, they're often like contradictory or biased. We're left to piece together these fragments of her life, weigh the evidence, consider, the motivations of those who wrote about her.
Absolutely.
And ultimately draw our own conclusions.
Yeah, and perhaps that's the beauty of history.
Yeah.
It's not always about finding these definitive answers, but rather about having a dialogue with the past. Wrestling with those ambiguities. And really recognizing the complexity of human nature. Shangguan Wan'er's story really invites us to do that.
It does.
To think critically, to question those assumptions, and to grapple with those really enduring questions of power, ambition, and the choices we make when we're facing adversity.
It's also a reminder that power is a double-edged sword.
Absolutely.
It can be a force for good.
Yes.
A tool for creating change. Advancing justice. But it can also corrupt.
Yes, it can.
Leading to ruthlessness.
Yes.
Oppression. And the silencing of dissenting voices.
Absolutely. And in Shangguan Wan'er's case, she seemed to navigate that duality of power with remarkable skill, using her influence to advance her career and achieve a level of prominence that was really rare for a woman in her time.
For sure.
But ultimately, she became entangled in those very power struggles that she had so adeptly navigated. It's a reminder that even the most astute and ambitious individuals can be swept away by forces beyond their control. It's true.
Her story leaves us with so many questions to ponder.
It does.
Did she ever regret the choices she made? Did she truly believe in the causes she supported? Or was she just trying to survive in this, treacherous political landscape?
It's hard to know.
These are questions we can only speculate about.
We can't.
But I think they offer really valuable insights into the human condition. Those dilemmas that we face when power and morality collide.
That's a great point. And perhaps that's the most valuable lesson that we can get from Shangguan Wan'er's story. It's a reminder that even when we're faced with overwhelming odds, we have the power to make choices, to shape our destinies, and to leave a mark on the world. Even if it's a mark that is contested, debated, and ultimately erased from the official record.
I hope this deep dive into Shangguan Wan'er's world has sparked your curiosity.
Me too.
And inspired you to, learn more about this fascinating period of history.
It's a great period.
It is. What about you? Any final thoughts?
I would just encourage everyone to, seek out those hidden stories. To question the narratives that you encounter and to really embrace the complexities and the ambiguities of the past.
For sure. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring. Keep questioning. And keep diving deeper.
Today we're taking a look at divorce in ancient China.
Oh, cool.
But specifically the Spring and Autumn period and the Meng and Qing dynasties.
Wow, okay.
And you might think that divorce back then was a really uncommon thing, like we think of today.
Right.
But actually, during the Spring and Autumn period, it was incredibly common. But not always for the reasons you might think.
Oh,
It
no.
wasn't always about, personal feelings. It was more about politics and maneuvering and strategy.
Wow.
Yeah. So, for example, we have Lady Kai,
Okay.
and she was actually remarried off without a formal divorce to kind of send a message.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was the state of Kai sending a political message to Duke Huan of Qi.
Hmm.
And so that's really different from what we see later on, like in the Ming and Qing dynasties,
Okay.
where divorce was like this major social taboo,
I see, yeah.
even for the elite.
Oh, wow.
So we're going to be looking at stories of noble women who are like caught up in these political power plays, as well as the struggles of like ordinary people.
Yeah.
And even a woman who stood up for herself in this like really heartbreaking situation.
Wow. That's quite a range of stories from ancient China.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
So let's dive into the spring and autumn period first.
Okay.
It was a time when marriage was really seen as the strategic alliance between two families.
Yeah.
And some texts even refer to it as like forging a good relationship between two surnames.
Oh, wow.
So what can you tell us about how divorce played into all of this?
Well, during this period, divorce was more about kind of severing those political ties.
Yeah.
Rather than like focusing on personal feelings.
Right.
Lady Kai's story is a perfect example of that.
Okay.
Her husband, Duke Huan of Ti, decided to go to war with the state of Chu.
Mm-hmm.
So he sent her back to her home state without a formal divorce.
Wow.
But it doesn't even end there.
Oh.
The state of Kai then remarried her off,
Oh my gosh.
again without a formal divorce, as like a deliberate message to Duke Huan.
That seems almost passive aggressive.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It was a very public way of showing Duke Huan
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
they weren't on his side anymore.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, their allegiance now was with Chu.
Wow.
This kind of, political maneuvering, it was pretty common back then.
Yeah.
Another fascinating story is that of Lady Huai.
Okay, and how did she get wrapped up in all of this?
Well, she was first married off to a hostage prince,
Hmm.
the future Duke Huai of Jin.
Okay.
And it was a way to kind of establish a bond between the two states.
Right.
But Duke Huai escaped.
Oh, no.
Yeah, he escaped back to his home state,
Uh-oh.
leaving Lady Huai behind, again, without a formal divorce.
So what happened to her?
Well, so to complicate things even further,
Oh,
she was then married off to Duke Huai's uncle,
oh wow.
who later became Duke Wen of Jin, which is the same man who had taken her in as a hostage.
That's a crazy story.
It is, and reactions to this remarriage were very mixed.
Okay.
Some people saw Lady Huai as like double favored by destiny,
Oh, wow.
but other people criticized it as licentiousness.
Wow, that's so interesting how one situation could be viewed in two completely different ways.
Yeah, it really highlights how social values were kind of changing at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And this leads us to another story, the story of Shengbo's sister,
Okay.
who was also caught up in all of these political marriages.
Right.
But her story, as we'll discuss later, has a much more tragic ending.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's a lot more to uncover here.
Yeah.
But before we move on, is there anything else about the spring and autumn period that really stands out to you about divorce?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that while these stories are really interesting and tell us a lot about the elite,
Yeah.
they don't really represent everyone.
Right.
For ordinary people, marriage and divorce were likely influenced by other things.
Yeah.
Probably less about political strategy
Right.
and more about like economic necessity or personal circumstances.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's important to keep that in mind as we, keep learning about this period.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's fast forward a bit
Okay.
to the Ming and Qing dynasties
Right.
and see how things changed when it comes to divorce.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because what was once this like strategic political tool
Right.
became a huge social taboo,
Wow.
especially among the elite.
Yeah.
So what do you think caused that shift?
Well, during the Ming and Qing dynasties, Confucian values really took hold.
Okay.
And they put a huge emphasis on family harmony.
Okay. Yeah.
And so because of that, divorce was seen as like this disruption
Yeah.
of this harmony.
Right.
And it could really damage a man's reputation.
Wow, so it was really looked down upon.
Yeah, and there's this really interesting quote from Fang Bao,
Okay.
who was a scholar from that era.
Okay.
And he basically complained that men couldn't divorce their wives, even if they were really unhappy in their marriage.
That seems kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah, it really does.
You would think that a society that's so focused on harmony
Right.
would want people to be able to leave relationships that weren't working.
You would think so, but
Yeah.
actually this taboo probably had some unintended consequences.
Oh, like what?
Well, by making it so hard to legally separate,
Yeah.
men started taking concubines
Oh.
as a way to, seek companionship and fulfillment outside of their marriage
Yeah.
if they were unhappy.
So basically, trying to force this image of a harmonious family
Right.
might have actually led to more suffering.
Yeah, especially for the wives.
Right. It's important to remember, though, that this pressure to maintain appearances
Yeah,
really only applied to the elite.
exactly.
So what about everyone else? What was divorce like for ordinary people?
Well, for the lower classes, economic hardship was a huge factor.
Yeah.
Much more than social stigma.
Right.
And so there are a lot of records that show men actually selling their wives because of poverty.
Wow.
It wasn't about reputation or social standing at all.
Right.
It was just about survival.
Wow. That's heartbreaking.
It is. It really shows how the pressures and constraints around divorce were very different for different social classes.
Definitely. And there's actually a great example of this in the classic Chinese novel Water Margin.
Oh, yeah.
One of the main characters, Lin Chong,
Okay.
he's falsely accused of a crime.
Oh, no.
And to protect his wife, he writes her a letter of divorce
Oh, wow.
so she can remarry.
Hmm.
And knowing the context of divorce during that time,
Yeah,
it really adds another layer to his actions.
for sure.
It wasn't that he wanted to divorce her. It
Yeah.
was that he was trying to keep her safe.
Yeah,
Because the system wasn't really set up to help them.
exactly. It shows the really difficult choices people had to make back then.
Yeah.
For the elite, it was all about reputation.
Yeah.
But for the poor, it was about life and death.
So we're seeing this really complex relationship with divorce,
Right.
influenced by social expectations, economics, and even gender.
Absolutely.
And this leads to a question: did women have any say in all of this?
That's a great question.
Yeah. Could they initiate divorce?
It seems like in earlier periods, like the Spring and Autumn period, and even the Western Han Dynasty,
Okay.
women did have some agency
Okay.
when it came to initiating divorce.
Mhm.
But as we move into the Ming and Qing dynasties, things change,
So things got more restrictive.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
By the Ming and Qing dynasties, it was really hard for women to initiate divorce, both because of social expectations and the legal systems in place at the time.
But were there any exceptions?
There was one.
Oh.
It was a legal concept called yiju.
Oh, okay. And what is that exactly?
Basically, it means that the relationship has completely broken down.
Okay.
And in those cases, divorce was allowed,
Mm.
even if it was the woman who requested it.
So even though the system wasn't really fair to women,
Right.
there was at least some recognition that certain things were so bad that they
Yes.
justified ending a marriage,
Exactly.
even if the woman asked for it.
Yeah, and to see how this played out in a real situation,
Okay.
let's go back to the story of Shangbo's sister.
All right.
It's a really powerful reminder that behind all of these big societal changes and legal frameworks,
Yeah.
there were real people
Right.
dealing with really tough choices.
Okay. So Shangbo's sister.
Yeah, so she's a really sad example of how women, even those from like powerful families,
Yeah.
could be used as pawns
Yeah.
in these political games.
Right.
You know, like we talked about earlier, Shangbo, he saw a chance to improve his own position.
Yeah.
And so he decided to marry his half-sister
Mm.
to a powerful noble from the state of Jin.
Wow.
And this was actually her second marriage.
Oh, wow.
She had been widowed before this.
I can't believe he would use his own sister like that.
Yeah, and she was really unhappy about it.
Yeah.
There's this really sad quote from her,
Oh,
where she says to Shangbo, "Even birds and beasts do not abandon their mates. What will you do?"
wow.
So she's basically like begging him to be loyal and compassionate,
Yeah.
reminding him that even animals show more loyalty than he is.
And did it work?
No. Sadly, he didn't listen.
Oh, no.
He forced her into the marriage.
Wow.
And the tragedy doesn't even end there. After her second husband died,
Okay.
her first husband, he wanted to prove that he was loyal to the new rulers in Jin.
Mm-hmm.
And so he did something horrible.
Oh, no. What did he do?
He drowned her two sons.
Oh, my gosh. That's awful. What happened to Shangbo's sister after that?
You know what's amazing is that even after all of that,
Yeah.
she still showed incredible strength.
Mm.
She refused to go back to her first husband. She said that she couldn't live with a man who couldn't protect his own wife
Yeah.
or raise his children with compassion.
That's a really powerful act of defiance, especially in a society where women didn't have a lot of control.
It really is. It shows how resilient people can be
Yeah.
and that desire for autonomy, even when things are really tough.
So we've really explored divorce in ancient China from all these different angles.
Yeah, we have.
You know, the political stuff in the spring and autumn period,
Mhm.
the social pressures and economic realities of the Ming and Qing dynasties,
Yeah.
and the stories of the people who lived through these times.
It's fascinating to see how things changed from that early pragmatism,
Right.
where marriage was just a tool,
Yeah.
to the later periods where it was all about keeping up appearances.
Right. And even through all of that, we can still see these glimmers of hope.
Yeah.
Of people like Lady Kai and Shangbo's sister making their own choices,
Absolutely.
even if their choices were limited.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how much things have actually changed.
Yeah.
Are we really free to decide who to marry and whether to get divorced?
Right.
Or are we still influenced by social pressures, money, gender roles?
It's a really good question.
Yeah.
And a good place to end our deep dive today.
Yeah.
It's something for all of us to think about.
Yeah. I hope everyone enjoyed this look into ancient Chinese history.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.